I'm going to be moving slow. And if my mind stops, I'm just going to stop. And I want you to stop with me. And I want you to just be silent with me, please. We haven't got much time, and there is a lot I'd really love to intimately share with you. I don't know where that's going, but I do know, at least I really feel and have come to understand for myself, that there's a deeper understanding in all of us than the intellect. But as I speak, normally what happens in people, we try to understand the words that's being spoken with the intellect. I'm not going to say don't do that, because if you try to do it, it's not going to work very well. But I'm going to be trying to communicate with you beyond your, deeper than your intellectual understanding. I was talking to Eric, where is he? I was talking to Eric about this earlier. And here's an example of what I mean. Sometimes if you're lost in thought, right? I mean, just completely lost in thought. Might be walking in the forest or down the road somewhere, but you're just totally oblivious to where you are, you're just lost in thought. All of a sudden, there's a realization, an awakening to the fact that you're lost in thought. You didn't decide to do that. It was totally spontaneous. There's something working there that wakes us up to our condition. We don't have much to say about it. It comes in as a surprise. And the important and amazing thing, it's its own action. Wei Wu Wei, action without an actor. In other words, as soon as that realization comes in, it's the action of waking up. You're no longer lost in thought. Here's another example. Some of you know about my past as a motorcycle gang leader. And I was a real macho guy, real macho persona, living that. And there was this realization or awakening to the fact that I was being that person, that tough guy, because I was afraid not to be. Okay, but what happens there when there's an awakening there, but there's also an ego there. And the ego comes in and says, oh yeah, I get it. See, the ego comes in, the intellect comes in, and it possesses, takes credit for that intelligence. For that innate intelligence is always trying to wake us up to our conditioning. And it usurps it, makes it its own, and stays a healthy ego, right? That, what's underneath that ego, that intelligence, is what I want to communicate. I want that to listen to what I'm saying. So, can we forget about all the teachers and what they said and all the teachers you read about? And can we just forget that? That's tough, though. Because what happens is we listen to what somebody's saying and measure it according to what somebody else is saying, and that's not who I'm talking to. And sometimes people will say, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the Buddha. And that's what I'm pointing to, the simplest way to say it. So I'm going to back up. Bill mentioned my tracking days. So I'm going to share something with you, and it will hopefully delve into the title of the talk. I spent a good many years of my life tracking animals. That might sound silly to some people. But there was this, my mom brought my brother and I up really with an intimate relationship with nature. She would take us out for walks and show us all the wild edibles and what not to eat. And she made us really, really intimate with nature. And that really stuck. It was a wonderful gift that she gave us. And that became a passion for me, is to be intimate with the natural world, with the animals, with the plants, with the mycelium. And to track an animal was like I was doing it because I was driven to do it. It wasn't like something I was doing this because it was something I should do. You don't fall in love with somebody because you should fall in love with them, right? You fall in love with them, it's totally spontaneous. You didn't decide to do that. Well, there's something moving here. There's a love, there's a passion to understand this animal, to be intimate with this animal, to be intimate with nature. And when you're tracking an animal like that, there is no need for the intellect or language. It's totally a visual thing. When Coyote tracks a deer, it's a totally sensuous thing. It's with the nose, but with a person, it's with the eyes. You're tracking with your eyes. Coyote's tracking with its nose. But you don't need to think about this. It's all visual. And as you track the animal, and I mean, there's so much you can learn. We used to track animals. We started off one day in the winter with snow. Maybe we'd be tracking a fox or something. And then when night time came, wherever we ended up being, we'd camp out there, sleep in the snow, get up the next morning, and keep tracking that same fox. And you really begin to understand. You look at a track, and sometimes you know exactly how fast the animal's going by the patterns. You can even usually sometimes tell which way the animal's looking by its tracks. So there's a real intimacy there. And if you keep doing that and keep doing that, you find that as you become intimate with that animal, you realize that it's affecting everything around it. It is affecting the whole forest. What's happening to the forest is not separate from this animal that lives in it. And what's happening to the forest is affecting this animal that lives in it. It's all interbeing and all intertwined. And you're not learning about this intellectually. You're not reading this in a book. It's not just in your head. You're breathing this. You're living this interbeing and interconnectedness. When you watch plants grow and you watch them intimately year after year, you get to know how a plant grows and what it looks like if it's not disturbed. So you have an intimacy with plants. As soon as an animal munches on it, there's a disturbance. And you learn how certain animals will bite plants. They leave different markings when they do that. And then you realize that the forest is actually speaking to you. And it will tell you just by how the plants are growing and which types of species are being affected, you know what kinds of animals are around. And usually you know how many, whether there's a low number, medium, high, or whatever. So there's this incredible intimacy, this entanglement, this interbeing, this co-creating that you're observing physically, not mentally. There's situations I would see in the hemlock that marks on the hemlock bark. And it was a certain size and it had to be a certain age. I didn't know what they were. And it took me, I think, 10 years watching that mark and as the hemlock grows, the mark changes. And then I finally realized the marks I had been looking at, they were deer scrapings. But it took me 10 years to watch a fresh deer scraping and what happened to it in the 10 years to know what it looked like 10 years later. So there's this incredible, and it's all observation. It's just all observation. Okay. Now a deer comes into the forest. A deer is born. And I had a job, it was my job to, I was doing this job for the state as a tracker, and it was my job to track. I had to find one deer, one fresh track in the snow every day and follow that exact deer the whole day and write down everything it ate. You do that day after day, you realizing that this forest is the deer. The deer is the forest. You're visually realizing that, writing it down too every day. There's no separation here between the forest and the deer. The deer is the dancing, walking forest in the flesh. Then that deer is taken down by coyotes. And I used to work for a biologist, and we had, if the deer was out on the ice, we had to get to it within 24 hours because he had to get a femur, and he would check the deer for its health when it died. But there were so many animals and birds feeding on that deer that we had to get to it within 24 hours before everything was carried away. Well, that was all carried away back into all these other beings. That deer had come out of the forest and was dispersing into the forest, into all the beings of the forest. There was nothing that you could separate there. Okay, now there's intimacy. You realize, too, that you can't separate who you are from this earth. You are the earth, dancing, laughing, crying. That's intimacy. Now, can we go inward? We're intimate now with the outer landscape in ourselves as that landscape. But there's something missing here. There's still a division. Can we go inward and track the animal self the way we track the animal in the forest? Are you listening to me now visually rather than intellectually, like when you're tracking an animal? Can we go inward into the inner wilderness and become as intimate with that as one can become intimate with nature and the planet? And this ego's leaving all kinds of tracks, all kinds of words, thoughts. But see, we don't do this because we're trying to gain the system somehow, because we're doing it because we want to be a better person. It's there a fascination. Like for me, there was a fascination with nature. There's a falling in love with nature. There's nobody doing that. It's spontaneous. It's happening to you. You're not doing it. It's doing you. So can we go inward and fall in love with what's going on in there? With real curiosity and openness. Can you really listen to this with really curiosity and openness? Then there'll be communication and intimacy. If you go into the inner landscape, and here's where I'm going to try, I'll see what happens. I'm going to try to communicate what happens for some people. This is going to be different for different people. When there's an awakening, what does that really mean? I'm not talking about a spiritual experience like samadhi or something like that. But if you go into the inner landscape and you're tracking the ego self, the separate one. I know, look, you've all heard that that's not real, right? Doesn't exist. You've all read this, I'm sure. But the intellect kind of thinks it knows that. That's what keeps it alive. So what happens sometimes is that ego self, the thinker of the thought, not only does it reside there, the feeling that there's a center there, but it also feels like that it is aware. It is conscious. It is what needs to go inward and track itself. It is what has to pay attention to thought. It is what has to observe. It thinks it is the observer. Just like when I was the leader of that gang and there was a realization that undercurrent of machismo was fear, that intellect, that ego came in and put that little badge on itself, put that little badge on itself, right? I got that. because it thinks it's what's doing all this. But here's what can happen, and it can happen in different ways, and I'll try to go into that. But here's what happens for some people. Some people it's going to be far more gradual, and they might not even kind of notice it for a while. But here's what happens. The ego self is tracking itself. It's observing itself. It's observing every single thought that comes in, and it's trying to observe the spaces in between the thoughts. Well, that's what it's told it should do, right? So that's what it's doing. And it thinks it's observing. It also can project that the observing is more than what it is. Gets tricky. But what can happen, like waking up to being lost in thought, there's a waking up to the fact that the observer, the separate one, was created. It's an assumption created by thought that it is doing the thinking and observing. This is an assumption created by thought, which is thought trying to observe thought and the spaces in between the thoughts. So there's something there that's dividing itself, and it can't see that it's dividing itself. It's lost in itself. It's lost in thought. Just like when you're walking down the road and you're lost in thought, this ego separate self is lost in that thought system. A realization comes in. There it all is. The separate self can't see. There's a realizing that. It doesn't see it's dividing itself. But the very act of it dividing itself is being seen. But it's not what is seeing. All of a sudden there's humility. I can't see. I'm not the intelligence I thought I was. I'm creating separation and not even seeing it. That is all put in its place by this awakening. This realization is its own action. And that whole belief system in that whole separate self, that whole belief system, the belief system itself is done. It can be that quick done. And there's a shift in observation. What thought was observing all that time realizes it's blind. It's blindness, it's put in its place. Right? And the ego can't, the self can't see. The self is not what's having the awakening. The awakening is coming from, now this is not correct. The language here is not going to be able to do this. So I'm going to just do it the best I can, but I'll fail. So something outside, quotation marks, outside the separateness is revealing the separateness. The separateness can't see this seeing. It's blind, but it can't deny it. It can't deny its blindness. So something has made itself known, and its observation itself, a universal intelligence that we all have, that is waking us up to our limitations. to ourselves creating this separateness. Now the inner landscape is becoming whole. Now there's intimacy inwardly and outwardly. Everything is becoming whole. Without anybody doing it. You didn't wake up to being lost in thought. You're not going to wake up to being lost in your ego. Okay, now different things are going to happen now. So that kind of waking up can probably also happen in different ways. Like if some people have experiences of no thought for a week, then they realize that thought is put in its place right there and then too. That's just a different way of it. That's not how it happened for me, but that's how it can happen, I think, for some people. But now, when that happens, it's going to look different. And this is what I really want to share with you at a deeper level than your mind, because this could happen to you and it could show up in different ways. And if it does happen to you, and if there's a deeper listening and we're planting seeds, those seeds will flower if this happens to you. So if you're in AA, and people in AA are having awakenings. Paul Hedman is a good example. And Guy Eric that comes to our Thursday night Zoom group is a good example. There are other AA people I've talked to as well. But when you have an awakening in that culture, you know, there's something that they keep telling you this, you can't do it. You're not going to be able to do this. You need something outside, a power outside yourself that's going to come in and do it for you. So when you have an awakening in that culture, it's the power of God or whatever outside you that is awakening you to your limitations. And it looks a little different, oh, not a little, a lot different than if you were waking up in a culture from Vedanta. Because in that culture, they're pointing to the false self and the higher self, right? So if you have an awakening in that culture, it seems to me that it's going to be a kind of default. Oh, that's what they're talking about. See, when that awakening comes in and reveals the false self and puts the false self in its place, then, oh, I'm not that. I'm the higher self. I'm that which is not changing. I'm not coming and going. It's all matter is coming and going. But I'm the essence, the formless. I'm the awareness. I'm the permanence. And that can become an identification. And that can solidify. In other words, if there's an identification with the higher self, we're all seeking permanence. And when we find permanence like that, like I'm not going to die, the body's going to die, but I'm this higher self. When there's that kind of permanence in something, and there's peace there, there's because there's a sense of not being, concerned about different emotions and stuff like that. That's kind of transcendence. So people will stay there, and if there's an identification with that, and it becomes like, oh, this is the enlightened state, all my questions have been answered. And that's a good place to be, and it is an awake place, but because There's an identification there, an unacknowledged identification. And I've been there for a while. You just stay there. That's where you're going to stay, is in that transcendental space. At some point, if you haven't not fully identified with that, well, let's back up for a minute. If you had an awakening and you were Christian like St. John of the Cross, it's going to look different. If you're a Buddhist, it's going to look different. If you had a teacher like Rose, it's going to look its own way. If you had a teacher like Krishnamurti, it's going to look different. Like Krishnamurti never pointed to a higher self. The Buddhists don't point to a higher self. I'm not sure what Rose pointed to. But they're all pointing to a false self, but not a higher self. So if you have an awakening from the Krishnamurti school, you won't probably end up in that identifying with the transcendental self. And if you had an awakening in like Thich Nhat Hanh culture, Buddhist culture, you would not awaken to a higher self. There would just be awakening to a false self. Now, here's what happens. We're, I think, going to end up going full circle here. So, for me, I was in that transcendental place for a while. And there was this place that wasn't coming and going. But there was all this other stuff that was coming and going. But I was, you're not affected by that, right? Oh, that's just coming and going, just clouds going by in the sky. Nice place to be. But I kept poking, kept questioning, curious, tracking, observing, wondering. Is that it? Well, when you do that, there's that passion for truth, the way of no way. There's a passion for truth there. That's that inner intelligence exploring itself through all of us. So what can happen is there's a realization that what's not coming and going is the coming and going. They're not separate. You're all of that. So it's like the Bodhisattva. You go from the transcendental and come back into the body. And you embrace it all. Now, from the Buddhist perspective, they talk about emptiness of self, but full of everything. And that's where you are. You're now empty of self, but full of everything. You are the universe. Okay, let's back up again. Who are you? And this is fascinating. Physically and non-physically, this is just fascinating to me. How can you be who you are without everything that ever happened? How? There's a realization that these words can't be what they are without everything that ever happened, without all you being here, without me being invited here, without the sun, without the earth, without nature, this wouldn't be happening. Who are you? Who is the individual? We're individuals, right? We have separate, all our personalities are really different. There's no denying that. But take a good look at that personality. How can it be what it is without all the people you met? Without all the experiences you had? Without all your ancestors, plants and animals? That little personality is the whole universe, showing up as that separateness. Even the separateness is whole. The separateness can't be by itself. It has to be separate from something. How can anything be divided by itself? It's so silly. And really fascinating. So the whole universe is funneling down to your personal separateness. And through all your difference, everybody is different. We all have a different history. You know how we use microscopes and telescopes, and now we're using AI to further explore the universe. The universe just keeps opening up and opening up to us. Well, the universe is funneling down into us as all different instruments, ants, trees, mycelium. You get the picture, right? And it's exploring itself. And we're all part of it. So as the universe is affecting you, and everything that ever happened is affecting you, doesn't it go both ways? You're moving as that whole. As a separate whole. You're moving as a separate whole. And as you move, you're creating as the whole. We're changing each other right now. We can't help but change each other. So as we're being created, we are creating. We are the living life. Affecting and changing each other. We are what's happening in Gaza. We are what's happening to other people. Where's the compassion come from? I think the compassion comes when there's wholeness. There's a real deep, visceral, not something you read in a book. There's a real deep, visceral understanding of interbeing, co-creating, a quantum entangled universe, a holographic universe that none of us can separate ourselves from. And it's interesting how the separate self is seeking wholeness. It's already whole. It can't help but be whole. You wouldn't be able to have a sense of a separate self without everything that ever happened.